Today we have Dr. Anya with us. Dr. Anya is a scholar of language learning and Black experiences in multilingualism. She's an associate professor of second language acquisition at Carnegie Mellon University, the 2023 Duolingo Research Fellow, and a 2023 Mellon Foundation New Directions Fellow. Her primary fields of inquiry are applied linguistics, social linguistics, world language education, multilingual education in the metaverse, and critical discourse studies examining race, gender, sexual, and social class identities in new language learning through the multilingual journeys of African American studies. She was introduced to applied, in this work that she's going to present to us, she introduced to applied linguistics a critical race pedagogy for more effective, anti-racist, equity-minded, and inclusive world language teaching. And she makes a call for Black linguistic reparations in U.S. language education in the summer 2024 issue of Foreign Language Annals. Dr. Anya's research is published in journal articles and in her book, Racialized Identities in Second Language Learning, Speaking Blackness in Brazil, published by Routledge. Winner of the 2019 American Association for Applied Linguistics First Book Award, recognizing a scholar whose first book represents outstanding work that makes an exceptional contribution to the field. Her other main areas of inquiry include intercultural communication, applied linguistics as a practice of social justice, strategic translanguaging in world language pedagogy, and currently she is building an online platform called AFR Metaverse, where African American middle and high school students meet, chat, and collaborate with each other Black teens in Colombia and Brazil, playing multilingual educational games, incorporating virtual reality experiences with a study of the history and cultures of Afro-descendants throughout the Americas. Dr. Anya, we are happy to have you here. We will hand over to Professor Makoni, who will start the conversation.
Okay, I would like to thank you, dear colleague and friend, for finding time to join us, and to thank everybody who is on this call. What I will do, first of all, is provide a bit of context of the African Studies Global Virtual Forum, and then move on to initiate a conversation with you. It is my great pleasure and personal honor to formally welcome you to the African Studies Global Virtual Forum. The African Studies in this title does not reflect our narrow interest in African Studies. The African Studies is simply an administrative entity in which the Global Forum is situated. As you know, in universities, all activities and initiatives have to take place in particular units. So for us, the African Studies here was simply that it is organized and administered from African Studies, and our budget comes from African Studies. Given your busy schedule, we sincerely appreciate that you are able to commit time to converse with us. I'm not sure how much you know about the African Studies Global Forum. I can say, however, it is a consortium of academics, activists, filmmakers, and artists from around the globe. We meet every Friday with invited guests such as you. The objective of the meeting is to engage in a dialogue about topics that are of mutual interest to the guests and to us. By so doing, we create a public pedagogical space for topics that are important and relevant by interfering in people's schedules. So every Friday we know we meet and all that, so that becomes a public pedagogical space. Our organizers come from many different universities in Africa, the United States, Canada, and Europe. The Global Virtual Forum is a collaborative project that draws on expertise from diverse people and scholars at different stages in their careers. Some are starting others were in retirement and they've come back into active scholarship again. In this regard, it is also intergenerational. In addition to Friday sessions, we hold summer schools once a year. These summer schools are itinerant. The last two were organized by the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. The 2025 summer school will be held in Doha, Qatar, and we anticipate that the 2026 summer school will be held in Brazil. We publish all our sessions in a series of volumes that we call the Global Forum on Southern Epistemologies through Multilingual Matters. My engagement with you is going to revolve around a number of key themes. One, your personal experiences in the academy and your scholarship. And then after about 40 minutes or so, I'll allow my colleagues and friends to jump in and engage with you. I have a fairly good working idea about your personal trajectory, but some of the colleagues who are here and who will be watching this video might not know much about your own background. So can you perhaps give us a bit more about your own personal background and how that has shaped your values as an academic? Why did you eventually end up being interested in multiverse, in Black experiences, etc.? Who is this person that we have got in front of us? Or putting it more dramatically, if your grandmother was to tell your life story, what would she say?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much to the forum. Thank you to you, Dr. Makoni. Thank you, everybody kind enough to invite me here. Regarding your question about my personal history, trajectory, I'm maybe 3 or 4 different kinds of Black. And I kind of start with that. My parents were colonial subjects back when Britain was this colonial power. And my mother was born in Trinidad, and my father was born in Nigeria, back when there was no Nigeria. He was actually, he was born in Bamenda, what is now called Bamenda, Cameroon. And eventually when they made Nigeria, he ended up being a part of that. And they met in England when both colonial subjects were sent over to the colonial center to be educated. So they were both in university in England. They met there, they married, and they went back to Nigeria, well, to support the building of a new republic, because Nigeria secured its independence in 1960. They went back in 62 or thereafter. I was born in 76, and I lived in Nigeria for the first 10 years of my life. After that, my parents' marriage didn't work out. So my mother, who had been living in Nigeria for about 26, almost 30 years, left and came to the United States. She didn't go back to Trinidad because the majority of her family had already immigrated to the US, to Canada, UK, and other places. And the United States was where she had the most family and support. So we moved to the DC metro area. I consider myself from that area because that is where I was primarily raised, in Montgomery County, Maryland, specifically Rockville and Silver Spring. And I had my college education up in New England, undergrad and a little bit of grad, and eventually made it out to California to UCLA, where I did my PhD. My educational journey, it arises, frankly, from my identity and from different Blacks that I am. My entire life has been an experience in multiculturalism, multinationalism, multilingualism,
Mhm.
and the many different manifestations of Blackness and Afro-descendantness
Mhm.
in our world. So I have always been into that. I was born
Mhm.
into that. And
Mhm.
that has been the trajectory of my career, is this question of who are we as the African diaspora? Because I am both African and I am diaspora in terms of my origin and, of course, my physical trajectory around the world. And the work that I do has to do with our identities as Afro descendants, the languages that we speak, the colonial languages that many of us still speak, and the orienting theme and topic for me has been, how are we going to use language to bring together Black people, members of the African diaspora in the Americas. So I focus on learning and teaching English, Spanish, Portuguese, working on French as well, and working through language learning with Black youth so they can talk to one another, engage with one another, hopefully politically organize with one another, based upon the many commonalities that we have as people with very similar histories. And if we have history of enslavement, we were basically dropped off at different ports around the general same area. So even the work I do in applied linguistics, in language teaching, language learning, is solidly moored by this Pan-Africanism, if you will.
Let me take you back to something that you said, which struck me, and I want to see if we can think this idea through. If you can help me clarify it for myself. You said you see yourself as being made up of these multiple Blacks. Now, my question is this. What is the nature of the relationship between these pluralistic Blacknesses that make you up? Or let me put it more dramatically. So you are saying you are an assemblage of Blackness, right? If I were to put it like that, what is the nature of the relationship between these different types of Blacknesses that make up this particular individual that I'm engaged in a conversation with? Are there tensions, complementarities, overlaps? How do they shape your own your own experiences as an individual?
They're all of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are tensions, and I mean, tensions is a polite way to put it, outright conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
There are commonalities, complementarity,
Yes.
to use your words, and they're fundamentally West Africanness
Yes.
in my composition, right? Because even in my Americanness, and I consider America a very broad place that doesn't just include the US. So even in my US Americanness and in my Caribbean Americanness and in my Latinness broadly, that's very West African as well, because what draws us together are commonalities, how we recognize one another and how we vibe and sync with one another, because we see in one another common linguistic practices, common religious practices, common musical practices. I mean, you name it, we see all of that in us, and we have very, very obvious similarities in those ways. Our roots are there. And in all of this, you can localize it in this West African region. But then we can talk about the conflicts. And we can talk about conflicts, for example, between my feminist politics and patriarchal politics of not just geographically current West Africans, but the West Africans a few generations removed that are in my other sides. So we have these conflicts, we have these tensions. And we also have the tension of, having decolonial ideals, but then I teach colonial languages and I promote the learning of colonial languages. So that's another tension. So in addition to all the vibes and commonalities and all the similarities, and how at home, for example, I feel in Brazil, because Brazil is extremely West African, and very specifically, I hate to say Nigerian, because who is Nigerian? Who made Nigeria? So the region is what we see and we recognize when we go to the Americas. Those of us who have roots, immediate roots on the continent. So these similarities and these commonalities that we feel across the Americas as Afro-descendants, as members of the diaspora, they're pretty strong. And they're related to very fundamental things that I hold very dear, while at the same time, I still challenge and question, especially as related to the status and treatment of women.
If you were to redo your career and prioritize and come up with a hierarchy of what you think, if somebody had asked you that question a decade ago, what is it that keeps you, what is the central organizing principle of your scholarship? Let me give you a good example. I became more aware of my own interest in aspects about global Blackness and Pan-Africanism in the US, even though my experience in Ghana enabled me to understand it. But at that point, I didn't have a language to be able to explain it. So what drives my imagination at the moment, that's why the question that I'm trying to find a way of coming of clarifying why this question is interesting to me. What drives my imagination at the moment is a form of scholarship that cuts across, let's say, Africa and the diaspora, etc. So, for example, at Penn State, we are going to start a reading group that is called Afro Applied Linguistics, in which we look at the contribution of African American studies to applied linguistics, African studies to applied linguistics. That is predicated on an interesting aspect about scale, right? That one of the limitations of Black scholarship has been that it has been too local, right? And what we are interested in is to become ambitious in terms of scale geographically and scale in terms of time, right? So my question to you is, how scalable is your Blackness, right? Where does it fade into other identities, right?
Well, to answer your final question, I'll answer that. How scalable is my Blackness? Well, my Blackness is global. And my Blackness is relevant globally because Blackness is relevant globally. Because of the influence of Blackness globally, and because of the presence of Afro descendants
Yes.
And not just the physical presence, but the profound influence and impact that Afro-descendants and members of the African diaspora, however many generations,
yes, you go.
exert. So you asked, what is the central organizing principle
Yes.
of scholarship? Blackness. And if you were to ask me, for example, if you were to ask me what were the titles of the major works that
Yes.
I've produced since joining higher education
Yes.
30 years ago as an undergraduate to earn a bachelor's. My bachelor's was in Romance languages, and the primary languages that I examined were Portuguese and Spanish, and it was culture, societies, and languages. That was my focus area in Romance languages. And that would be culture, societies, and languages as related to speakers of Portuguese and Spanish in Latin America, and Portuguese, well, primarily Brazil. So my undergraduate thesis was about Carolina Maria de Jesus, a Black woman in Brazil, and about her literature, about her identity, because I came up from literature. When you want to study languages in the US, you usually have to study literature because language departments are primarily moored in literary studies. So I was looking at her identity, I was looking at her ideas of nationality and belonging, and I was looking at race and her Blackness. This was for my BA. And then my master's, which was in Brazilian studies, what was my master's thesis about? Miriam Alves, another Black Brazilian woman. And I was also looking at how her identities, different types of her national, her gender identity, her social identity, all of that manifests in her literature, in her literary production. So Blackness was right there too. Black womanhood specifically. Now, fast forward to my PhD. That was in applied linguistics, right? So at the doctoral level, I moved from literature to linguistics because I was no longer interested in language as an artifact or examining linguistic artifacts. I was more interested in language as a process and examining people's processes of language learning, for example. And what was my dissertation about? Well, the language learning journeys of African American students, Black Americans who went to Brazil to learn Portuguese, and what this journey of Portuguese language learning, what was its significance in their identities, their Blackness, and how did Portuguese language learning impact, influence, or how did it work out as related to their personal transformation? And personal transformation being in learning new ways to communicate race, gender, sexuality, social class, etc. And then so now, fast forward, I did that dissertation in 2011. I'm awful at math. We are now 2024, right? So I am still working on that. I am still primarily concerned with African Americans, Black people here in the United States, but then their relationship with other Americans across the Americas and their language learning journeys and how their Blackness manifests in all this. So much so that my most recent article in Foreign Language Annals has to do with Black linguistic reparations, the call that Tasha Austin and I make for Black linguistic reparations. We go through the whole history of world languages and language education here in the United States, and we detail the harm, the profound harm that's been done against Black people and Black students, Black teachers in our US education broadly, and specifically in language education. And we make proposals for repair, for redistribution, and also for recreation of new ways and new practices in order to be able to address this harm. So we are once again looking at Black people, Black concerns, Black identities, Black experiences. This is the central organizing principle of not just my experience as a human being on planet Earth. It's also the work that I do and my hopefully sustained contribution to applied linguistics and beyond.
Okay, it's interesting that you are talking about Black linguistics. Arthur Spears, Geneva Smitherman, Anita Ball, and myself, in 2003, we edited a volume called Black Linguistics, Language, Society, and Politics in Africa and Americans. Arthur Spears is here on this call, and he may be able to provide a better background to what our thinking was. What I find fascinating about what we were trying to do in Black linguistics is that we say that we were trying to foreground contributions to research on what we're calling Black languages by Black scholars in Africa and Americas. And then we proceeded to identify key epistemological and political underpinnings of what we were calling then Black linguistics. Ideas circulate in very interesting ways. That was in 2003. And the idea of Black linguistics somehow never caught on, but what then subsequently was to happen a decade or two later on with racial linguistics, similar ideas were to emerge. So what is interesting to me, which is an issue that I have talked with Arthur Spears, is how do ideas actually circulate in the world of academy? How do certain traditions get erased and other traditions get foregrounded? Was the argument that we make in Black linguistics predates racial linguistics by about 2 decades. But I don't think anybody knows anything that Arthur Spears, myself, Geneva Smitherman, Uju Anya were writing at that particular time. This then shifts me to the issue about how do these ideas circulate? What has been the disadvantage for you as a female Black scholar of writing as being Black? Right.
Well, our most enduring barrier, and I dare say our biggest barrier, is racism.
Yeah.
So when you call something Black,
yes,
it doesn't sell.
It doesn't sound good.
in racist institutions, and not just racist institutions, and racist academy, the racist academy, and in white supremacist institution, and a white supremacist academy. So, I am a scholar of race and race in applied linguistics, fair. And that gets a lot more currency.
Yes.
And that gets heard a lot more and gets granted a lot more legitimacy.
Yes.
In all the delegitimizing that happens. Let's not pretend that everybody is open and welcome to talking about race and racism in our field and beyond. But I get a lot further saying that I'm talking about race than saying I'm talking about Blackness and Black people. And this is because of racism. This is because of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So making the point that, in the biography that I was asked to give and that was read here about me, the first line is, I am a scholar of Blackness in multilingualism, in language learning. I lead with that, even though it is a lot more, let's say, widely appealing or sellable to say, I do race, given that it's also difficult to say you do race. So if I were to answer, if I were to, venture a guess of why Black linguistics didn't take off, but racial linguistics did, well, it's because, well, it's called Black.
What is interesting here is the young generation of African and Black scholars, when I meet them when I'm out of Penn State, the key question that they keep asking me is, why did you guys abandon Black linguistics and then move on to decolonial scholarship, Southern epistemologies? They find more inspiration from that earlier work. And now at least I've got a way of explaining to them that there was no way we could have what? That argument at that particular point in time was not marketable, right? They have a better option now. They can go back and play around with all these other various ways, because you need somehow to find ways of disseminating your ideas beyond yourself. And Black linguistics, other peers who is here can explain, never made it, right? Okay, now let me ask two more questions, then I'll hand over to this. What are your current projects? What are you currently obsessed about? Right.
Pro Metaverse. That is my jam right now. That is what I'm into, what I'm all about. And so Afro Metaverse is an online platform. So it is literally a space. It is an exercise in Black placemaking. It is, a venture in creating a space for Black people and Blackness, and multilingual exchange, multicultural exchange. So it is an online platform where Black kids, adolescents between ages 12 to 18 would gather, and these would be African-American kids or Black kids from here in the US, specifically from Pittsburgh, would get on this platform and engage in virtual reality, educational game-based experiences on this platform, on Afro Metaverse, playing, hanging out, talking, getting to know other Black kids in, for now, Brazil and Colombia. And we're also working on Canadian connections as well, Black kids up in Canada. So this idea would be this space for Black youth across the Americas. Now we're just starting with a few places in North America and South America, but ideally it would be across the Americas. And the experiences, the games that they would be playing and would be based on Afro-American, Afro-descendant cultures and histories. So histories from here in the US, in Colombia, and also in Brazil for now. So this is a space where these teens would gather, have these experiences, go on missions, for example, and engage in sort of my secret language learning plans, but we don't bill it that way. They're just gonna get on there and they're gonna play multilingual games and they're gonna work it out. Because we don't make proposals for them to go there and be taught languages. Because when you see what kids are doing these days, they're going online, they're playing FIFA, and they're organizing missions and all kinds of things on, multiplayer battle games. And they don't necessarily speak each other's languages. The kids are playing with kids from Korea, they're playing with people from all places all over the world, and they use all the technologies, online translators that they can get their hands on, and they make themselves understood. And eventually they learn how to speak whatever it is that they need to work out what it is that they do. I have two children of the adolescent range, and I watch them on Discord servers engaging with other youth of from all kinds of places and in all kinds of languages, and they solve their linguistic problems. So based on that, I will engage these particular youth in these activities, in this community building, if you will. And the idea would be for them to build these virtual relationships and connections to one day be able to go on study abroad experiences, kids from the US going to South America, kids from South America coming to the US for now, and meet in person and hang out in person with their virtual friends. So we're building the platform now. I'm begging for money. We need money. We need lots of money. So any of you who are part of funding agencies, who are part of any kind of research outfits that has money to give, I am begging and knocking on doors. I'm writing all kinds of proposals and emails because we need to hire programmers, developers, artists, curriculum designers, to build and maintain our platforms. And of course, we need to support the work of the organizations that I'm teaming up with in South America to be able to gather these youth for us and outfit a space for them with the VR headsets and computers, etc. And of course, paying local people there to be able to help us design the learning experiences and make them very relevant to the history and the cultures of Black people in that region, and of course across the Americas. So this is what I'm into now. This is where we're building AFR Metaverse, and we hope to be able to eventually study AFR Metaverse because all of these experiences will be recorded, and in many different ways. So the actual recording of what's going on online to the accompaniment, very close accompaniment and recording of experiences people are having when we do the in-person components, and also conducting interviews with the participants and the staff and everybody involved to do linguistic studies afterwards on how it is that we're interacting and we're engaging. Once again, oriented and moored by this concept of our Blackness, our learning and our engaging through Blackness, because of Blackness, in Blackness, etc. AFR Metaverse. That's what's going on in my life right now.
Thank you very much. We are finalizing a volume on language and race with Basi Antia, who is at the University of Western Cape. And what you're talking about is fascinating. We will get back to you and talk to you about it. Now, let me hand over to Kim or whoever is moderating to open up the discussion to everybody. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. Kim.
Yes, thank you so much. So again, feel free to add any questions or comments into the chat or use the raise hand function. We'll start with a comment from Alfred Kwamiteni, who says, perhaps you are a hybrid of what Professor Ali Mazuri described as African of the soil and African of the blood, where the African diaspora relates by blood, and those at home are both of the soil and blood, perhaps. Would you like to respond to the comment?
Yes, my response is yes. That is exactly what's going on in my life. African of the soil and of the blood. But then not just of the blood, right? Because, I'm not just kind of contemporary African blood. I'm also of African blood generations removed. Generations physically removed from Africa, but not removed culturally, and certainly not removed linguistically, and not removed in any meaningful ways besides, they were physically moved and they're now Africaning somewhere else.
All right, thank you. Gabrielle, I see your hand, so you can go ahead.
Hi, everyone.
Oi, Gabrielle. Somebody else I know and love. Bem querido. Ai, que prazer te ver, amor. Beijo.
Always bilingually, speaking Portuguese and English with the same body, black body. I remember in 2021, I was invited to talk at the University of California And Uju attended my lecture. It was an online session. And I remember that Uju began to speak Portuguese a little bit before my presentation. And the professor asked us, why do you speak Portuguese with your bodies? And I remember I said, is there anybody that speaks some languages without the bodies? So that's the way how you address that in English or in Portuguese, Uju. What a chance, what a pleasure to hear you and Makoni addressing some topic. And I was influenced most of the time by my curiosity, by the presence of U.S. scholars here in Latin America who are very interested in Blackness, Black studies in general. And Uju is one of the scholars who, besides the fact that she's so connected to Latin American topics and Afro Brazilian topics, she's very connected to Afro Brazilian scholars as well. But many scholars who we know a lot do not have these connections, primarily because we know the difficulties that you have. I want to address with you the way of color blindness in linguistics in Latin America or in the US, because I know one of the difficulties that we had some years ago. For example, we had one of the events organized here in Brazil, a series of events organized by our association with the Association for Linguistics in Brazil. And I remember, Uju, that supported a lot Black scholars here in our grievance and in our efforts to unmark whiteness here in Brazil. So I'd like to have the chance now to be thought-provoking to hear a little bit more because I know you understand the difficulties that we suffer speaking from. I know you all speak from difficult spaces or contexts from Ivy League universities or some other universities. But I know you all also know our difficulties here in Latin America because of your work. So I would like to hear a little bit more what you understand by by colorblind ideologies that we have in linguistics when we talk about race in Latin America and we're not heard or we're not considered. Or perhaps what you understand the future of these connections we have between Brazil and the US, that I and you or and Makoni, for example, is somebody who helps a lot all the young, all the early bird, early career scholars in Latin America. We know a lot of this, but we have no chance to talk to many of scholars sometimes. But you who support a lot, many of us, what do you understand by the future of these colorblind ideologies that we have in linguistics here in Latin America? And how is that connected to what you have in the US? Sorry if I'm being so long in my question.
Well, thank you very much. And so I wanted to address the first statement that you made regarding, well, why do we not have kind of closer connections with scholars in Latin America? And a big reason is linguistic differences, right? The expectation is that these scholars would speak English and publish in English and engage in English. And there is not much, if any, expectation that scholars from the US would learn Spanish, Portuguese, French, Haitian Creole, etc., to be able to engage with Latin American scholars and Latin American scholarship. We look at how we cite, for example, you won't find that many citations of works that are not published in the English language. And so this is a global North, global South problem to begin with. And I'm speaking specifically as it relates with US Latin America relationships. So my closeness has to do with the fact that I speak two of the primary Latin American languages, and I have engaged in scholarship related to them. So the relationship is there. And this is also why I do the work that I do. And this work is to promote language learning among Black people across the Americas, so we can speak to each other, read each other's work, and engage with each other and politically organize with each other without the need for intermediaries. Because when you have translations and intermediaries, their ideologies and their politics get introduced into the translations and the interpretations, and you don't get the information from the source. So that leads to this notion of the colorblind ideology. And that is a big ideology that in my work that I do, I support Black Latin American scholars, Black Brazilian scholars, primarily in their fight against the colorblind ideology, or what is actually more accurately described as a color evasive ideology. Because yeah, they do see color. They just choose not to acknowledge it and, quite frankly, pretend that that the differences are not meaningful, and there aren't hierarchies, and there isn't racism. So I actively fight against that. When I say, okay, I'm working with Black topics and Black scholars, Black participants to promote Black causes. And this gets a lot of pushback. I was just recently in Brazil and in Colombia, making the pitch for partners for AFR Metaverse. And in one of the proposal meetings and presentations that I was making in Colombia, the topic was, why Black this, Black everything? Why are you focusing on Black people? Why can't you just focus on everybody? And everybody usually means white. When people don't specifically mention race, and when they say that they're race neutral, and we're talking from a context of a white supremacist society or a white supremacist institution, which these Latin American institutions that I was engaging with were, when they say everybody, they mean white people. They mean those who have typically benefited from something good or programs, etc. And they're asking, why are they excluded from that? And so this is the conversations we have to have, that we engage in. We say, well, we are specifically focusing on this population and this topic because of the historical or the history of marginalization, and we go through all of this. We always have to justify our existence and the reason why we do the work that we do in the face of those who would come and say, why does it have to be specifically about Black people and for Black people? Which usually comes from this color evasive ideology. Why are you highlighting this? Why are you saying this? And which is usually, why are you troubling the waters? And why are you disturbing the hierarchies? And I wanted to, what Gabrielle was talking about, the organization, was another problem that we're having, in that there was a speaker series where scholars were invited to talk about Blackness and Black issues in linguistics. And I was invited as well, along with a lot of different scholars. And at that time, Black Brazilian scholars were complaining rightfully and righteously about the systemic racism in linguistics in Brazil. And they were complaining and making very serious and very justified and, well-researched and resourced and evidenced demands that the history of exclusion of Afro-Brazilian scholars in the Brazilian Academy as related to linguistics be addressed and remedied. And so during that time, and I was invited by this organization to come and talk, I declined the invitation. And I said that, well, Black scholars in Brazil are on strike against you because of institutional racism, and I will not cross a picket line. And I also, the reason that they're upset is because you are prioritizing outside Black people, global North Black people, and highlighting them and focusing on their work and bringing them to a Black organization to talk when you do not do that for Black Brazilians. And I will not take the place of a Black Brazilian. And it got bigger, it became something, but eventually I had to cut the communication short because it wasn't going anywhere. So that was what Gabrielle was talking about. And the result of that was that Black Brazilian applied linguists and other language scholars created their own organization, Repense, to do the research they want to do, to hold the meetings they want to hold, and to highlight Black Brazilian scholarships and Black Brazilian scholars in the way that the traditional and white-centered organization did not and never had.
Thank you so much. So I'll hand it over to Lynn Mario, and then we will return to the chat to address the questions there.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Uju. Eu também estou falando do Brasil.
Que legal! Abraços também, muito carinho.
So first, a couple of things. Though I'm speaking from Brazil, I was like your father. I was born in a British colony. So, I'm glad to have the opportunity to thank you for expressing what you did to the Queen. I think I felt represented. So thank you for that, okay? For having the courage to do it. I'm sure you paid a price for that, but we all do. Now, I'd like to come back to a couple of things that you...
Still paying.
A couple of things. I'm a bit familiar with your work, and a comment that you made here in response to Sinfree Makoni's initial comment. You said, "Oh, I teach colonial languages," right? And that, I think what we do is we may teach language, but we also look at language from a particular epistemic or social locus of enunciation, right? So those of us who've had these diasporic colonial experiences, when we teach colonial languages, we are not teaching them like someone from the global north would teach them, right? So I'd like to know what you feel about that. But it's also connected to your text on reparation, and your work on the metaverse. I think it's very important. I wasn't familiar with that. I think it's very important what you're doing. But in reparation, where you make constant reference, or I'm not sure if it's you or when that article is being situated, to the South African Committee of I forget what it's called, of reparation as well, the Truth Commission. And I think what happens there when we fall into that paradigm of reparation, which presupposes that issue of redistribution of wealth and whatever, right? And here that takes me back to Sylvia Wynter's concept of radical humanism and the idea that it's no good asking them those who relegated us to a position of lesser humanism or even as being non-humans, because they just, we're using a discourse of inclusion, but then we're expecting to be included into a concept of humanism that doesn't accept us. So it's relatively easy to say, okay, we'll include you, but when you're nearer to us, you'll continue to be the downtrodden. So I think the strategy is to challenge that concept of humanism, and not in a dichotomic way to say, here I'm speaking, this is my opinion, to say we want to replace your humanism with ours, because then we're going to have one single hegemonic humanism, which is no doubt going to exclude others, because there are multiple concepts of humanism, right? So there's a strategy, as the concept of radical humanism of Sylvia Winters is, to promote some kind of paradigm of a coexistence of multiple humanisms, right? And my reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, of hearing you talk about this metaverse, your metaverse work with Black students across the globe, I think that is extremely important in getting them to see themselves not through the eyes of the other in that old double consciousness thing, but to see themselves as they see themselves and not as others see them, and connecting this seeing ourselves as we see ourselves in other communities, racist communities as well, right? And that's so important. I think that's, I'd like to know if you think this is the first step towards, confronting or promoting different kinds of humanism. What do you think, Uju? Am I?
First of all, thank you for the challenge, right? I accept it and will lean into it, right? The article on reparation, this concept on Black linguistic reparations, is situated within the US context. And within the US context, we're also having a debate of, financial reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans here in the US, and whose labor, the enslaved Africans, their labor, their free labor, their actual human bodies built this whole apparatus here. And a lot of the institutions, all different kinds of institutions, not just educational, that we work in, that function to promote the wealth of this nation. So there is a reparations conversation happening right here in the US, and initiatives, legal initiatives for reparations and for actual monetary compensation for the descendants of those who were exploited and whose labor generated so much wealth that people are benefiting from today, and others are actively not gaining. They're actually being put down even further in many different ways for. So we situated the reparations, the Black linguistic reparations conversation within that context. And we make similar arguments, within that particular frame. So I would say that we follow that kind of path, right? So whereas we're not asking for money in the sense of, labor has been stolen and benefits are all around us that we are not getting, but others are, the enslavers are getting and their descendants are getting. We talk about how there has been harm in world language study and language education in the US and what we can do within that context. AFR Metaverse, I really like your framing of it as this space that will contribute to this multiple humanism. And I'm so glad this is recorded, because I'm gonna look at the transcript afterwards and put that in our pitch, right? So it is definitely a space for unapologetic Blackness and for Black people to, as you said, see ourselves, for ourselves, with ourselves, right? Black people in the Americas, right? Because Black people in the Americas have a very unique experience and a history that we should all kind of tap into across the Americas. And the space is for that. And for youth to also see themselves and be with themselves and engage among themselves and learn critical languages for us here in the Americas and possibly worldwide. And start making critical connections with not just individuals, but hopefully their communities as well, that will then bear all kinds of fruit that I don't even imagine. I cannot even imagine. So that is why I'm very excited about the possibility of this space. And a question was asked, I don't know where or how, or maybe in the chat somewhere, about how Afro Metaverse and what it can be for applied linguistics research. It is actually a very fruitful place and space and source of applied linguistics research, because if you're looking into language learning, for example, language learning experiences will be happening in Afro Metaverse. What won't be happening is language teaching, right? Because that's not the purpose of the space, and we don't have time for that, essentially. Because the little bit of time that we have, these students, for example, these young people are going to be engaging on the platform maybe, twice a week at 1 to 2 hours each time. We cannot waste that time on language classes. So language teaching won't be happening, but language learning certainly will be. And there would be a very rich source of research potential, of data, if you will, for language learning, for education in the metaverse, for game-based education, game-based education design, for technology in language learning, a very rich source of applied linguistics research in, well, those who do discourse analysis and conversational analysis will have mountains of data of multilingual interactions, multicultural interactions that they can dig into and see what's happening there. And those who are interested in Black linguistics and Blackness in applied linguistics have a very rich source of data there too. And also something that we have too little of is research on youth and language learning. And that is something that, because in our field, especially those of us who do SLA and language learning, usually our scholars would do research on the participants that they have most accessible to them, which will be adults, college age adults perhaps, so maybe older adolescents, but usually adults. And we don't have much in the, or not much, but we don't have enough in the K through 12 range. So this will be a treasure trove for even those who are working on language learning at the younger ages. So yeah, it's once we get it off the ground, we build it and we start getting folks in there to talk and play games and learn and do all kinds of fantastic things on this Afro Metaverse platform. Very soon after that, there will be all kinds of recordings available for people to dig into and do applied linguistics research.
Thank you so much. Just to maybe that was my question in the chat. Thank you so much. Yeah, we just recently heard a talk about like game practices in language learning, and I thought it was quite interesting because there are apparently different studies that show that some children are really into it, and other children are kind of like, no, I'm in a classroom here. I don't want to engage in my free time activity in the classroom. It's like not a good fit. So I thought that was quite interesting in terms of how this could feed into teaching practices as well. or maybe it is exactly the point that it is not about teaching. And that kind of raises some anxieties about, you know, what happens to language teachers and all of that. But I think it's really something to be thought about. So yeah, thank you so much. This is really fascinating. I hope this you attract a lot of funders and support.
I hope so too. Spread the news. Uju needs money.
Cool.
All right, thank you so much. We have another question in the chat, and then Sangeeta has indicated that she has some comments as well, and then we'll head to Arthur. So I'll just read this longer question in the chat from Rochelle Faridi. Sorry if I didn't get your name right. Dr. Anya, thank you very much for your speech. I'm doing my PhD on language policies in Colombia and their impact on Afro-Colombian communities. Could you please mention some of the proposals of reparations you were talking about from a linguistic perspective? You commented on this, so I don't know if you want to go on more, but there's another question. Also, I have noticed that the main Afro-Colombian movement called Movimiento Cimarrón does not appreciate the term Black people because they claim it is a colonial concept that does not value all the cultural variations of ethnic groups that Blackness imply. They prefer people with Black skin. What is your view on this terminology? Thank you.
Okay, so the reparations proposals, what I'm going to do is I will post in the chat the article where I make the argument where Tasha Austin, who is the first author, I'm the second author on this piece, where we make the argument for Black linguistic reparations in the US language education context. So do note that this is a US focused article, and the arguments would come from there. So if I will post it for you, and you can take a look at the many different proposals that we make. An example is just showing potential for the reproduction of what we view as successful proposals or successful things that are happening right now. For example, in I believe St. Paul, Minnesota, for the past couple years, the East African elementary magnet school has been going on. So this is a two-way immersion or dual immersion, but it's much more than that. It's actually a multilingual immersion elementary school experience based on East African languages and cultures. So they hold elementary classes in at least 7 different languages spoken in East Africa. I think Swahili, Amharic, Arabic, and I'm blanking on the rest, but this is a so far quite successful public elementary school that is based on this concept of an elementary school experience where East African languages and cultures are learned, promoted, and children from that particular background and from any other background that happen to be in the drawing area and the catchment areas of this particular school can go and benefit from, and their families and their communities can benefit from it as well. So we cite that as a very good example of a proposal for change and for redistribution, for reparations that can be reproduced in other communities and focusing in other languages, etc. I will post the link to the article. The article is open access, so it's not behind a paywall or anything. You can easily click on it and see all the different proposals and examples that we show. We also show a curriculum that I co-designed with Melissa Baralt, Aris Clemens, Deborah Gomez. We created a Spanish language learning curriculum that's free and open and available for anyone to download online. We have units, we have lessons, and this is a very special Spanish language learning curriculum because it focuses on Blackness in Latin America as sort of like the cultural content, of this language learning program, and also focuses on the needs of Black learners of Spanish. So we show that in the article as an example of a reparations project, if you will, that can be used as a model. So I will also link that, or I think people are also doing this work and linking for me, thank you very much, in the chat. So regarding what you said about the term Black people and some activists in Colombia preferring people with Black skin, I don't have anything to say about that. Black people suits me just fine in my work, and that is what I use. But I definitely do appreciate others complicating that particular term and preferring a term that more accurately describes their understandings and their experiences, especially in the localized form. I think we can live with different terms. And if I were in that particular context and that is the term that they use, I would adopt that for that context as well. I don't have any particular compunction with the term Black people, knowing that, yes, it's something that even the whole racial category itself, I mean, racialization and race itself, we didn't make that. We inherited that from a very nasty history of the use of racism and racialization to hierarchize and categorize people for the express purposes of exploitation and all kinds of nastiness. But it's the term we're working with right now, and yeah. So I don't have any particular compunction against. And in that context, I would use the term that the people in that context would deem appropriate for that context.
All right, thank you. Sangeeta, do you want to go ahead and share your questions now? Are you there?
Thank you very much, Uju, for this, and to Sinfree for this first part where you discuss positionalities, and the way you discuss it was fascinating. And one or both of my comments and questions are related to that. So given what I would call that you are a normal human being on planet Earth, and that you situate yourself so specifically in the US, I found it fascinating, and this is where the question comes, that you never raised the term intersectionality, a term that you would probably have been part of the group of scholars who did do this seven decades ago. It was in the US that scholars, women scholars of color, that they came up with this. And in the third decade of this century, I'm wondering, and I engage with that term in an upcoming volume on intersectionality beyond Eurocentrism. So I'm wondering, is that concept not worthy of attention, given the way that you talk about multiple Blacks, pluralistic Blackness, assemblages of Blackness? So this was my first question. And I'm speaking to you from Sweden, a space where I'm not allowed to say that I am a scholar of color. And Anna Dumet and I had an exchange about this earlier in the spring. And she said, Sangeeta, we have to write about this because she comes from a place where Black and is something very important. One of my doctoral students is currently working on whiteness studies and racialization, another concept that we are not allowed to use here. And so we're working on the color scales. So this brings me to the issue of what is Black for you. Is Kamala Harris a brown presidential candidate, or is she Black? And there has been this discussion. So that was my second. What is global Blackness for you? And thank you for this fascinating discussion with all these questions that are coming up.
Thank you very much. Let me finish writing your questions so I can not forget them. So as related to intersectionality, I am one of the US scholars. And one of the US scholars that uses and works with intersectionality because I use critical race theory as a theoretical lens in my work. And intersectionality is part of that. One thing about intersectionality that I like to kind of establish an understanding, first of all, of what it is, because it's been very weirdly, not weirdly, by the actual word itself, it's been interpreted to mean just intersecting identities. And this is why I actually, instead of intersectionality, I prefer Patricia Hill Collins' term matrix of oppression, because it more accurately describes what intersectionality is talking about, which is not that we have these intersecting identities or we have multiple identities, is that, it means that oppression hits us on multiple forms and on multiple, in multiple forms and on multiple fronts. So I really do prefer matrix of oppression because, for example, I do not experience race in the same way as a Black man, even though we are both Black, because of gender oppression. And I do not experience social class oppression in the same way as a working class Black woman, even though we are both Black and women, because of economic privileges that I may have, that I do have, that she does not. So this is, the understanding that we work with. When we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about oppression, which is why I prefer matrix of oppression. I am paying attention to the arguments that are coming up, especially about the US-centeredness of intersectionality, especially, the arguments are coming up from, places where we have not focused on. We do note that intersectionality is a concept that comes from critical race theory, which addresses US contexts and US situations. So that would be my response to it. I am one of those scholars, even though, I didn't mention it right now. I'm in that gang of intersectionality. And I think it really works for us in this context to explain what's going on in the US. So with regard to what is Black and Kamala Harris, I regard Kamala Harris as a Black woman. She is a Black woman in the United States. And we are having this conversation about Kamala Harris's race and whether she's Black or not because she's Black. We don't talk about this about anybody else who is not Black, right? And the arguments that are being made, and the people who are making the arguments to discount her Blackness, or to say that she just became Black, or people who we rightfully should be looking at sideways when they make these arguments, because we know that they're making it to other her, and they're making it as an argument of anti-Blackness. And I think it is anti-Black to take away her Blackness from her and to say that she cannot be Black and Indian and Black and the other many different things that she is. because we're taking away Black people's pluralities, ethnic pluralities, and we're making the argument that we cannot have these multiplicities and be genuinely Black. And I certainly do not believe that. I don't believe that African Americanness is the only kind of Blackness that one can have. And I certainly don't believe that one can be only one type of Black or one kind of thing in their Blackness. And the most important thing to me is that Kamala Harris says and thinks she's Black, and that's good enough for me. And I am not, and if you look at her history, she went to historically Black college, she engaged in Black expressions of culture, Black organizations, and the fact that she also, in addition to that, has and very proudly claims an Indian heritage, to me is pretty regular, because my experience of Blackness personally is this multiplicities of ethnicities within my Blackness. Also, you asked, what is global Blackness, or what is Black? Black to me means being a descendant of the African diaspora, being an Afro descendant, and there's also a racial component to it in the, racial phenotype, if you will, and understanding that, race is not a biological concept. It is not a biological reality, although many people would like to make it a blood thing, because many people who appear a certain way do not get racialized in that way. And we understand that race moves and changes in different contexts. For example, this whole idea of what is Latino, and how the concept of Latino has been racialized in the United States, even though there's all kinds of white, Asian, all kinds of different people who are Latino. So, and then when you talk about Blackness specifically, you can even go to Brazil and see people who would be considered Black in somewhere else that are not considered Black in Brazil. So I understand the variability, even in the South African concept of honorary whiteness that was given to Japanese people. They were called white and stamped white because of their potential to contribute in certain ways, primarily economically, to South Africa. So I get that a biological argument for race is really not possible to be made, because race is not a biological thing. But I do understand the social reality of race, and I am a big believer and proponent in Blackness, which I define as Afro-descendants.
All right, thank you so much. Arthur Spears, feel free to go ahead and share. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Thanks a lot for that talk. It really got me going in terms of thinking and coming up with new ideas and so on and so forth. I want to put some things on the table. And my question is, what's your reaction to those things? Okay. And I'm going to do it as quickly as possible because I've got so many notes here. You've caused me to scribble over multiple pages, which of course is a very good thing. Let's just say something quickly about Blackness. How do we define it? Okay. First, we have to realize that historically, Blackness has been defined against Black people. There was a time when Kamala Harris would have been regimented into Blackness, and there would have been no question. But of course, Blackness as defined against us is evolving against us. So we have the category of mixed race person, for example, and the cattle mulatto, as you know, was de-officialized. One landmark of that process was the 1920 census, where the category mulatto or mixed race person was taken out of the census. So what I'm saying is we have to define Blackness for ourselves. Why have Black people embraced Blackness? Because we are all victims of particular processes, and we come together to defend ourselves against those processes, which fall under the category of white supremacist, anti-Black racism. But here's something that I was thinking about as you talked about language teaching. I have a heavy Romance background, so I've lived in Romance language speaking countries in Brazil and Europe and France and so on and so forth. And when I began teaching in New York, not in California, but in New York, it came to my mind that my main goal in teaching any course should be consciousness raising, whether it was a course on Black English, Black Studies sort of introductory course, introduction to linguistics, talking about phonemes and syntax. I would bring political consciousness into syntax, semantics, phonology, and morphology. It can be done. I had to think hard because we are not trained in a way that makes us think about the politics of morphology or syntax or something like that. But anyway, my question was how to bring political consciousness raising into teaching everything, not just foreign languages. Let me give you a quick example. When I was in Paris for the first time, I stayed at a pension, and there was a concierge, and at one point we had become friendly, and I had become very, very friendly with her daughter, who was a wonderful, smart person. And most of the American students had too. But at one point, out of the blue, connected to nothing, she turns to me and says, I would let you marry my daughter. Okay. Because you are évolué, you are evolved. Not like the Black people from Africa and the Caribbean. I was so taken aback by the comment that I didn't even have a comeback, but it's something that stayed with me forever. But I've given a name to what she was doing. It's the politics of Black fragmentation. Okay. And that has to do with who is Black and outside people who don't see themselves as Black, defining for us who is Black. And that came up in the Kamala Harris situation. Race is totally illogical and crazy. As you know, in the US, people who are blonde-eyed, very fair-skinned, whiter looking than any white person, or 99% of the white people you've seen are Black. Without problem. Okay. So it's totally illogical, and we have to see it as a fundamentally political problem and take control of it, because Blackness is evolving now, and as always, the notion is not being evolved in our favor, it's being evolved against us. And essentially what's going on is there's a fragmentation afoot of Blackness in the United States. People, if you have a white mom or a white dad or an Asian mom or an Asian dad, hey, now you don't have to be Black. You can leave the Black community and be closer to white. Okay, so it's a thing about fragmentation. One of the things that I tried to do in all of my courses, to the extent that I could, and sometimes I had to think hard, but I would usually find a way to do it, is to teach students about race theory, the history of the United States, the real history, where Blackness and slavery are central and fundamental. Also, a key thing, and this has to do with the evolution of racial thinking as controlled by the white-controlled academy, and that's the function of racism. What is the function? My students could not explain to me what the function of racism is, and that's crucial. That's something they should all know. Also, macro social processes, capitalism, socialism, democracy, fake democracy, facades of democracy, and so on and so forth. And also things that are not talked about nearly enough. And a language learning classroom is an ideal place to talk about them. Internalized oppression. Okay. And also colorism. And I believe that colorism is sorely under-discussed and under-theorized. And I'll tell you quickly one of the reasons I came to that conclusion. In my courses on Black English or Introduction to Linguistics and whatnot,
I wonder if I left my earphones.
I would find a way to talk about color terms. And in Colombia and Brazil and the United States and every place you have color terms. And it's not only about what their denotation is, what's their semantic or strict definition, it's about their connotation. You know, what do they imply? You know, what about an old expression like a lot of yellow, light-skinnedness, okay, less kinky hair, etc. A lot of yellow gone to waste, which is a traditional expression in the Black community, which is still used, but it relates to colorism. So gentrification, segregation, integration, I find that our students simply don't have coherent ideas about these things that they can express, and that is the huge lack in the academy, from my perspective, is making Black students and students of color generally aware of these basic themes and processes that the white-controlled academy drives us away from. They try to eliminate spaces where we can talk about those things. But I think we should create spaces where we can talk about these fundamentals of oppression and race and Blackness and whiteness, all of the macro socio-economic processes that are informed about those things. So as I said, my general question enveloping all of these comments that I made is, what's your reaction? What do you think? You've certainly done a lot of important work, and of course, your reaction would be a fundamental contribution.
So the first question that you asked was how to bring political consciousness raising into everything. And I believe that we're doing that with critical approaches to everything. So when we're doing critical research, we're doing political consciousness raising, and we're also making proposals for change. So there's a critical approach to pretty much everything now, and there are critical strategies, critical language awareness, critical research. So the whole idea is to interrogate and problematize what we've taken for granted. And what we take for granted usually is, the status, not what we're taking for granted as critical scholars, but what the powers that be would like us to kind of leave to rest, which is the status quo. And in challenging that, and also in very unapologetically and unashamedly doing advocacy-based research and openly, transparently advocacy-oriented research and teaching as well, advocacy-oriented teaching. We are engaging in political consciousness raising, and we are also making proposals for change, because a fundamental aspect of critical anything, or a fundamental aspect of a critical approach to scholarship, to instructional practice, etc., is making proposals for change. So that would be my answer to how do we bring political consciousness in everything? Well, critical. Regarding your anecdote about your experiences with the individual that essentially called you one of the good ones, the évolué, or I don't speak French, evolve, the better Black, if you will. I just like you, I never take it as a compliment when anybody calls me the good Black. And I actually ask them, what is it about me that you think makes me good? Let me know so I can get rid of that shit, because I am not portraying myself obviously in the way I want to be portrayed. I will never ever want anybody to look at me as the good Black, because the good Black means the complacent Black, the get along, go along Black, and which means the Black person that is not actively fighting for our liberation. And that would be the worst thing you could ever tell me, is that I'm one of the good ones. No, I am very, very bad for anything that's bad for Black people. So I appreciate your resistance to being called one of the good ones. It is not a compliment. And this, you raised the topic of colorism, and it's very, very important that we highlight that. For example, in the when we talk about Kamala Harris, in how she is able to reach the heights that she eventually will reach when I believe she'll win this election. She is able to do that because, she is a light-skinned Black. And that we should be very, very open about that. This is a Black woman, and I don't think her not legitimate in her Blackness, but we have all different types of Black people, and she happens to be one of the palatable Black people because of the light-skinnedness and adjacency to whiteness. And we should be very open about that. And we should be very open about how Stacey Abrams, for example, who is a dark-skinned Black woman and unambiguously Black as well. We like to say we're the people who are Black everywhere we go. There is no place that we go that we will not be Black. and she, Stacey Abrams, does not have the career trajectory or the potential to even reach such a career trajectory, not only because of not being light-skinned, but also, or having, she will not be president of the United States because she has a direct history to enslavement here in the United States. Kamala Harris has a history of enslavement of Africans through her Jamaican father. However, the enslavement did not happen here in the United States. That history and that ancestry is not here in the United States. And it is, just as Barack Obama was able to reach the heights that he did because he's a palatable Black and white adjacent Black. And we have to acknowledge that, and colorism is a feature of that, because ultimately the type of Black people that will be allowed to reach those heights are the ones that are perceived as most adjacent to Black, to whiteness, in their ancestry, in their appearance, and also in their politics as well. So, you know, for example, if you remember, if you've ever read or familiar with Uncle Tom's Cabin, there's this character, Eliza. And Uncle Tom's Cabin was written as an abolitionist tale that was meant to, you know, protest against and decry the evils of slavery in the United States. But it was an appeal to white people and the white conscious, you know, and white morality. And in that appeal, the most relatable characters, or the, you know, such as, for example, Eliza, was depicted as very light-skinned, almost, you know, it was just not, I forget the exact language that was used, but it's like something close to, you couldn't even tell if you look at her a certain way that she was Black, you know, so that this was how light-skinned she was. And this was how white audiences could be, and white readers of Uncle Tom's Cabin could be made to feel sorry for an enslaved woman, was to say, look at how similar she is to you. Look at how she looks like you. And look at how she could even possibly be your daughter. Can you imagine? So, and then the sympathy would be evoked in that way, and hopefully abolitionist sentiment, because it was brought, this white adjacency was focused. Just as Kamala Harris is being sold as, you know, she can relate to soccer moms, and we know what soccer mom means in the United States. It means white women, middle-class white women. She can be related, or she can relate to suburban moms, which also means middle-class and elite white women in the United States. And that's also how she's being sold, and that's how she's gonna make it, we're told, because the type of Blackness that she has is the one that's most palatable to white people. And we also understand that Blackness, you know, for it to exist, you know, it is always in constant comparison to whiteness. And so Blackness is Blackness because it's not white, right? In the, you know, in the idea of race itself. So all of this we are aware of. We know the system that we work in, and we strive to work against such a system in order to be able to advance, if you will. But we realize what is going on, and we're hoping to do what we can to liberate ourselves.
Thank you. I think we'll take a final comment or question from Yetunde, who has her hand raised, and then we will conclude our recorded session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Dr. Spears, I'm just going to say something about what you had asked, because even though I'm a graduate student at Georgia State and working on my EDD in curriculum and instruction, I'm also a teacher in middle school. And like 90% of my students right now, well, I would say over 90 are Hispanic speaking. They're Spanish speaking, so they're Hispanic origin, and they come from different countries in Central America and South America. And what you talked about, colorism and these shades of colors that we have, is something that I encounter as a teacher. So last year, one of the students in my class, he's, oh, by the way, I teach those who have been in the United States for less than 1 year. So it's more focused on language learning vocabulary to use in the classroom. So this particular boy, I think he's from Colombia, he's Black, but he speaks Spanish. So all of them are the same. All of them speak Spanish, but they're different colors. And one of the other lighter one, called him a monkey. Yes. And, you know, made racist comments about him. So as a teacher, like, I don't know how to address that, number one, because I'm not even one of them. I am supposed to be an outsider. all these people are the same, they're speaking the same language, yet you are making racist comments against another student. Then this year, I also heard one of the teacher who is supposed to be an in-school suspension told me one of the students got in-school suspension because he said in Spanish too, because like I said, all of them are speaking Spanish in the class. A Black teacher said it in Spanish, when are you going to go back to the circus? Didn't know that this teacher understood Spanish, but all he got was in-school suspension, which I don't think is the right approach. I mean, I think there has to be a way that we need to help these students. Now, the last thing I would say about this is the fact that in my school, so there are Black teachers, there are white teachers, there are Hispanic, and then you see the way that the students respond to each group differently, giving more respect to those who are white or so. And for me, my theory that I'm working on for my dissertation is decolonization. I'm from Nigeria. I know how much I even have to keep decolonizing myself right now, not to feel that something is better than what I do or what I say or how I look at things, because I've been socialized to think that white is better, British English is better or something, So I've had to continually decolonize my mind daily. So I'm wondering, what is the best way to help these kids to realize? Because if they even have this perspective when they don't even understand the culture yet in this country, what is going to happen to them as they grow older? Thank you.
So what you're describing and what you're having direct experiences with is racism, white supremacy, and specifically anti-Blackness that is rampant in Latin America. So the whole idea that we in the US have invented this category of Latino or Hispanic essentially it was invented by white people to not call Latinos and Hispanics white, and to keep making whiteness exclusive to, Anglos. But eventually, whiteness has been opened up to different groups that weren't Anglos, for example, Italians. So when you have Italians who look exactly like and who are probably share, common ancestry with people who we're calling people of color, Latino, and who are not white in the US, are not whitened or deemed as white, Italians eventually became white, 30 years ago? Help me with that. Anybody who knows the history. And my theory is Latinos are going to eventually become white too, because they literally the same. And when you even go to Latin America and you see people of Italian heritage in Latin America who are white, but then they, come to the US, and because of their national origin or cultural origin have been racialized into some non-whiteness that only has currency here in the US. And you bump up against that when you have white Hispanics and white Latinos with Black Hispanics and Black Latinos in the same space, and everybody is getting called Hispanic. No, the Black people are still going to be Black. So what's the Hispanic thing? So this is what you're seeing, and you're seeing the rampant anti-Blackness in pretty much all the countries that those who are called Latinos and Hispanic in the US come from. And of course, many of them have a US heritage that goes back for generations, and they only have sort of very loose ethnic connection to the Hispanicness. And a lot of them are also recent arrivals, as you may have experienced in your classes, probably more of those, or more of the ones that, for example, the US happened to, Mexican Americans, for example, the US encroached upon their territory, and all of a sudden they became USians and, not Mexicans, etc. So this is something that should be acknowledged, that Black people, unambiguously, Black everywhere people, are also Hispanic and are also Latinos. And they battle against the racism of, the whitinos, if you will, because racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness is a global thing, right? And it's also very important to understand that these students who are being racist and anti-Black, calling people monkey and everything, they are only non-white here in how we've done race here in the United States. If you were to put them back in the countries of their parents' origin or their origin or generations previous, they are white there right now. So if they were to go there on vacation or go back to see family, they are white there. So coming to the US and, involved in all of this, this is this is why we say that race isn't a biological reality, it's a sociological one. My advice, and what I have always done in cases like this, is I don't make the assumption that Hispanic means any particular racial category. So I always put Black Hispanic, white Hispanic, Asian Hispanic, et cetera, in front of it, right? And when I'm faced with issues like this in the classroom, I would call it out as racism, just as I would if I were dealing with, US or Anglo whites. So it's a very difficult place to be in, especially if you don't have power and you're working as, a graduate assistant, for example, in a situation where you're the lowest on the, the hierarchy with regard to instructors. And you're also facing the situation of being an international in an institution where you have a precariousness of your status that is an additional precariousness. That's the legal precariousness of, if they were to remove you for anything, you would have to, especially if your visa is attached to your school status. So these are all considerations that people have to negotiate when they're working through all this. However, it isn't just mere colorism, it's actual racism. Because if you were to define colorism as kind of light skin and dark skin within what we consider racial group, and racism is sort of interracial, this is an interracial conflict here. And colorism is also based on racism. So it should be treated with all the seriousness with which we regard racism, and we react to it. And I'm really sorry you have to deal with that. It's just nasty.
I had a quick comment, if I may. I'm trying to get rid of this thing on my screen. Okay. Very quickly, I wanted to clarify what I was getting at in terms of teaching. There are many scholars who do exactly what Professor Anya described in terms of decolonial studies, decolonial thinking, intersectionality, and so forth. But I was focused on the curriculum, and particularly, but not solely, in terms of undergraduates, getting the concepts across to them and verifying that they have understood and are able to use the concepts productively. And that's the thing. Graduate students aren't so much an issue. They read the paper that their professors and others have written, they understand it, and okay, they're ready to go. It's undergraduates who unfortunately have such a minimal understanding of these issues that we've been talking today, that it makes you wonder, where are we going as a group when our Black relatives and their children and grandchildren are being taught by people who mostly don't have information that is critical for Black people. And even if they do, they're unwilling to teach it to students because, of course, they feel that it's what encouraging dissent and resistance, because that's what it does. But it's tragic to learn that you have a class of 20, 50 students and none of them know anything of substance about American history, slavery, race, color, intersectionality, and those things. They don't know it about racialization, that it has an origin. It hasn't been there since Cro-Magnon or whatever. So that's what I was getting at. You know, how do we get it in their minds, that consciousness raising, so they can use those concepts productively for organizing and thinking and so on and so forth. I just wanted to stress that.
Sure. We're also doing that work at the undergraduate level. Those of us who teach both at the graduate and at the undergraduate level, we do that work in whatever environment that we are teaching. And I would also resist painting with too broad a brush the undergraduate population, because they are coming with a lot of understandings and challenging us with complexities that perhaps we haven't engaged with in many ways. And a lot of them come from progressive educational institutions and practices that we don't, typically, we haven't always seen. And one area, for example, that our undergraduates are coming up in and, really adding to the richness of what we do in critical and decolonial work, it is challenging our notions of gender, for example, and gender identity specifically. And also helping bolster a lot of the work that we've done in post-structuralism to, break down categories, for example. So, and forcing us, because if we have to accommodate and serve the needs of, for example, non-binary students, we have to think about how we've established binaries and dichotomies that are not working for them. And they're challenging, and slaying a lot of sacred cows. So I would not discount undergraduates as unsophisticated in their knowledge and understanding of systemic oppression, and also how to engage and create identities and realities outside of the system. We only need to look at how they are challenging systemic establishments and understandings of gender identity. And another person I know and love here, hey Bonnie. Names are appearing and I'm seeing people, so I just wanted to shout out.
All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.